Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. And we're going to talk today about retainers and reporting letters in eState, how to use them, how to set them up, and then answer any other questions that people have. So welcome, and I'm going to just share my screen. And don't forget, if you want to work on your own while I'm doing this to follow along, feel free to do that on another screen or somewhere else. So the first thing I just want to talk about is setting them up as your default with your default sort of choices. So as you know, on the left, you have client, users, documents, macros, billings, firm. Documents is where you set up your default and you pick the document that you want to work on. So let's work on the retainer first. So again, these are going to be your defaults, but you're going to be able to change them at the time that you generate it for a particular client. So I've set myself up as the responsible lawyer by default, but if someone else in the firm is going to be on this retainer or the lawyer in charge, they can put their stuff in. I typically charge a deposit. Many don't. So whatever you do. I also actually charge an initial deposit as well. So when they sign up for an appointment, I get $500, which I say is fully refundable. If after they meet me, they don't want to go ahead, they have 7 days to do that. And then great, if they want their money back, no problem. Hopefully it doesn't happen very often, but that's the way I do it. Then there's things like you do want to include a quote. So you can do a fixed quote, an estimated amount, an hourly rate, and you can suggest a range. Those kinds of things. And what documents, what are you doing for them? You're doing, wills, single wills, multiple wills, powers of attorney, life insurance declarations, and there's just the form of how big the retainer is going to be, for example. The format for the retainer. So let me just go to a client here and show you how we do that. So Homer and Marge have called me up. Maybe I've met with them in advance. Maybe not, but I want to do a retainer agreement. So I'll click on the documents and select retainer. Of course, I certify that I'm okay to do this, and up comes my defaults. Okay. But for this client, let's say for whatever reason, Lauren Cohen is the lawyer on this. I can change that, of course. Maybe I did include a retainer amount of, $1,250. And I included a retainer, an initial amount of $500. I'm going to use a fixed quote of between $2,000 and $3,000. And I'm doing multiple wills and powers of attorney. Let's say I'm not doing life insurance declarations. So I generate that. And as you know, comes up right here. And open it up. And here we go. And you always hit enable editing because it'll update the whole document. And because I'm acting for, my firm name is going to go in there. I've called my firm your firm name and Lauren Cohen. So that's why it's doing that. But your firm name will appear there. And it's a joint retainer because I'm acting for eState saw that we were acting for both clients. So it's going to have a joint retainer. It's going to include what we're not doing. We're not giving tax advice or giving foreign advice. This is the idea of the joint retainer clause. So it's automatically going to put that in, as well as this clause that talks about what happens if after retainer, one of you contacts me in the future and what our rules are about that. And then it confirms that the fees for service will be between this and that. And we, by default, put in that, once I send you the drafts, I can bill you 3/4 of the file. So if you're ever afraid you've sent out the drafts and, you want to bill them, that's what by default it puts in there, that you can charge 3/4 of the fee. We're going to make this all customizable. It's not quite there yet, but all of these paragraphs are going to be customizable, so you'll be able to edit this the way you want it. Then we have the deposit provision, and then the signature page. And of course, like any other document, this is all editable. So if you want to say, we agree that 100% of the fees go ahead and change that if you want after you've generated it. So that's just the retainer, and it pops out very quickly. And what I typically do is after I generate it, I save it as a PDF and then send it over to the client with the summaries and whatever else you're sending them with your email, etc. So that's the retainer. Any questions? Feel free to unmute if you like and ask any questions about the retainer. All right. Out of curiosity, do people generally use the retainer? It's a good thing to have in every file is a retainer. The two things, if you ever get called as a witness or have to call Law Pro about something, or your professional advisor and your professional insurer, and one of the first questions Law Pro will ask is A, do you have a retainer? And B, do you have a reporting letter? So those are the two things that we're going to talk about. But so a retainer is a good idea, and you know, it excludes certain things. It tells what you're hired to do, and those kinds of things. So, anything else? Any other?
Yeah, Jordy.
Yeah.
As a sole practitioner, the retainer pops up. You're retaining the firm and me. Well, it's just me. Is there a way to change that so it just says you're retaining me?
I'm going to check that out.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll make a note. Maybe if you leave that empty, we'll see it. If maybe that's what we'll do. We'll build that so that if you leave that empty, it's just going to put the firm name down. Thanks for that. That's great. I'm going to try that right now. Let's try that right now. Let's set this to empty and see what we get. We probably get a space, but let's see. Yeah, so it's going to leave that. Yes, because we're worried that people are going to forget that. So we'll come up with some way to do that, Charlie. Thanks. Okay, so anything else on the retainer? Great. So let's go back then to our document tab, and I'll just close this down and let's set up our reporting letter. So a few things that you can do, set up by default. I typically send my reporting letters by email, but you can change it to whatever you want. I call my reline is always preparation of estate documents. I never want to put in estate planning or anything too broad, because I want to just say, listen, I was hired to prepare estate documents. And that's why I use that, but you can put in whatever reline you want and who's the default. Escrow agreements, that's if you're going to hold the originals, and we'll talk some more about that. And then when you're, do you typically do multiple wills? Do you typically include a registered asset beneficiary designation in your wills? What are you doing with the originals? Do you normally draft powers of attorney for the clients? And if so, do you typically return them to the client or hold them by again, these are your defaults, right? So you can always change this when you're particular client, but just set it up what you would normally do. That's what I would do here. Okay. And then whatever font you want, etc. So that's the default. And so that's what's going to get generated unless you change it. And that's what's going to appear as the options when you generate it. So let's go back to Homer and Marge. And so you only, a point just to make about the retainer and the reporting letter, you don't have to generate one for each client. Obviously, it's gonna, when you're acting for both clients, you just need one. So you can generate it from either client. So let's go with the reporting letter. And so when we're doing a reporting letter now for Homer, it's going to fill in the options for whatever we put in as default, and then it'll pull the file number for Homer and Marge. So let's just say the file number was put in. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's fine. That's going to appear in the letter. Let's say we're doing multiple wills. We're going to give the originals back to the client. We're going to do, now here's what we could do. We could say, listen, we're doing powers of attorney for personal care, and we're going to give 2 copies back to you, and we're going to hold 1 copy. Okay, that's what those options. So you can actually have multiple options there. Okay, and for the let's say for the powers of attorney, we're going to hold 2 for the property power of attorney. Okay, then what we're going to do here is we're going to generate this document. I hope I didn't go too quickly, or if I did, we'll go back over that. But those are that's what those options do. So here is the reporting letter. Now, I know everybody wants it put on their letterhead. We're working on it. It's a bigger thing than one would hope, but anyway, we're working on it. We know people want that. What we typically do is we either just copy this and paste it onto our letterhead, or copy the letterhead and paste it onto this. So you can do it either way you want. I think in our firm, we just copy the whole thing, and we have a letterhead template, and we just copy it, paste it onto the letterhead template, and that's what we do. For now, anyway, that's what you got to do. So it's going to put in the date, whatever date you pick. It's going to print, if you put in the client's address, it's going to put that in automatically. I didn't have their address in eState, so I didn't know that, but you can obviously always edit it, and etc. It's going to put in the file number. It's going to put in the method of sending it. And it's going to identify what documents you did, what documents you're returning to them, and what documents you're keeping. Okay. So that's what, because we put that in, it knew that we were holding certain ones and we were giving back certain documents. So I'm just wondering if, yes, I'll show you the escrow agreement in a second. Let me just go back to, sorry. So that's what it's going to do in the first section. It's going to outline where all the documents are. Okay. It's going to separate those documents the firm's holding with those documents that you gave the originals back to the client. And identifies how many copies you're holding of each or giving back to them. If we're talking about powers of attorney, not wills, we don't allow you to give more than one, sign more than one will. And then what it does is it puts in a review paragraph. A lot of this is standard stuff that you'd want in every will, but there are certain things that are dynamic in essence based on the data. So in this case, a draft, it was a joint retainer, and it saw in this case that each of them left the residue to the other absolutely with no trust, and it was 100% and all of that. So it saw the data and it added this clause in there. So basically confirming that, we talked about, other ways to deal with it, but you didn't want to do that. So you were content to do that. Then it looks at all the data and sees, okay, are there any beneficiaries who are, and either of the clients US citizens? Are any of the beneficiaries US people? Do you have foreign assets? So it's going to put in reminders if it sees that you've got any of those. It'll do that. If it sees that you appointed a US person or a foreign resident as an estate trustee or an attorney, it's going to talk about that and the warnings that that you probably gave them. And hopefully if you didn't, well, it's in here if you forgot. That kind of thing. It'll look at whether you did you included designations in the will or you didn't. If you selected the option that says, did not include registered plan designations, then this would say, I confirm that I've not changed your designations. You're responsible for that. And you've confirmed with me that you're satisfied or whatever. So it'll look at that dynamically. Same for insurance declarations, right? Again, it would see if you're doing insurance declarations, et cetera, that you would, that it would put that in. If you didn't do insurance policies. So let me give you 2 examples. One where the client had no insurance policy. So it would see that and say, I confirm that you don't have any life insurance. If the client did have life insurance, but you didn't do an insurance declaration, then what it would say then is, I know you have life insurance and you have designations of beneficiaries, or designating a beneficiary makes sense in some situations. So we talked about it and I'm not doing that for you. So it'll kind of cover you on that point. If you chose that you did multiple wills, then it'll put in a whole clause about why multiple wills may work and why you did it in the first place. And then it'll talk about the powers of attorney as well. So that's how the reporting letter works. For those of you who who do hold originals of documents, especially powers of attorney, you can create, when you generate the reporting letter, and I'll just show you that where that is again. So when you generate the reporting letter, you can have an option to include an escrow agreement document. That's going to be used for any documents that the firm is holding. Okay. So, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So it's a very good idea, as I said, especially if you're holding original powers of attorney, to have an escrow instruction on when are those going to be released? Because, without this, when do you release them? So this is, for example, it saw when we generated the reporting letter that we were holding 2 copies of the financial and 1 copy of the personal care power of attorney. And what this is saying is, when it can be released to your attorney upon your request, that is the client's request, upon the attorney's request. So you get basically to choose which, what you want, and you can talk to the client about whether you want to exclude one of these boxes or include them. We also have this, which is often the case, where if the attorney requests it, then you can only release it to them if you have information, and I'm saying you being the lawyer, you have information that it is unwise for the client to manage their own affairs. So it's not the same as the capacity test for, capacity to manage property. We haven't gone with that as a default. We've gone with a softer language, which is information, not even evidence, but information that it's unwise to manage your affairs. Now, you may choose not to want to do that, and there's good reasons not to, and all of that. But if you do that kind of practice, if you do hold originals, then eState will give you the option. And I usually have the client initial that if they want that condition placed on me. And the rest of it is pretty standard powers that, basically I get to charge for that, and I'm protected, and all of those other things in the escrow agreement. But if you do hold originals and you don't use an escrow agreement, I really strongly recommend you looking at eState's escrow agreement, and I'd recommend you use that so that you don't get in trouble with, like, okay, this person's now asked me, they say the person's incapable. I have no, when can I release it, right? And that's the benefit of a escrow agreement. So that's that. Any questions about the escrow agreement or the reporting letter? Feel free to unmute and no. I hope people do use the reporting letter. It's saves a lot of time, and it does really provide some security for you, in that it covers many of the things that you would have discussed with the client. And so, yeah, that's.
Jordy.
Yeah.
It's Tom Rassus here. Quick question. I know in the reporting letter, when you're referring to the registered accounts, in general, why doesn't the program actually pick up the specific account numbers or financial institution information when you're preparing the designation
For RSPs?
Yeah, RSPs and TFSAs. I mean,
yeah.
I thought there was a general concept now where we're starting to identify them with more than sufficient certainty to make sure we, as opposed to a general, all my RSPs or all my TFSAs.
Yeah. I mean, I typically don't do, my theory is that the Act doesn't, unlike insurance, doesn't require us to identify exact account numbers for RSPs. And so that's why we don't do it. And often we don't have that information. It's not required like it is for life insurance. That is something we can certainly put on the list, though, Tom, and say, if it does have an RSP, if you've got that information, then use it. Otherwise, don't. So that's a very helpful. Just generally do, and maybe in the chat, just let me know if anybody else prefer using specific account numbers for RSPs and TFSAs. So if I'd love to get a survey on how, how many people feel that that's important. We always try to, not that we're not going to do it. It's just a matter of priorities,
Yeah.
obviously, Tom. So, but that's why we don't do it, because we often don't have that information, and unlike insurance, it's not required.
Right. Thanks.
Thanks. No, the great suggestion, though, Tom. Thanks. Any other questions? Right. One of the things, maybe Charlie, on your point, one of the things is we're going to have the ability, if you have more than one lawyer, to have different custom inputs, different inputs as defaults, et cetera. And so maybe that's a place where we can make sure, if you've only got one lawyer, that we put that in, exclude the name. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Oh, something else I wanted to mention. So we had this come up a few times, and I realized that, let me just try. I don't know if this one's going to work. No, that's probably not going to work. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to try this. Okay. So let's say you're acting for a spouse, like a client, and their spouse is deceased. Okay. So I just want to show you how you should deal with that, because I understand there's some mistakes being made. So if I have a spouse who's deceased, then it's important that I make them a widow. Okay, to make them widowed, because let me just call this widowed. I don't know. Let's call it an actual name. Okay, so regardless of if I mark them as deceased, now I probably should mark them as deceased and widowed, but making them deceased does not automatically change not yet anyway, doesn't automatically change the relationship to widowed. So you have to set them as widowed. Once they're set as widowed, for example, you won't see the surviving spouse scenario. Okay, you won't see their name in, my spouse means in the definitions. So that's how you deal with a person who has a deceased spouse. For example, you make sure they're marked as widowed, and then you won't see, if my spouse survives me, if my spouse is not alive, none of that stuff will appear there. You will be able to add that widow's kids, for example, if you wanted, and do all that, but you won't see my spouse means this person when they're not alive. So we realize that that's kind of our fault, in the sense that if people would rightly assume, I think, that if you made somebody deceased and they were your spouse, it would change their status to widowed. We haven't done that yet, but we're going to. But in the meantime, if you mark them as a widow, the relationship down here as widowed, then it'll work just fine. Okay. I don't know if anybody's run into that, but I did hear that from some people. So we continue to build out the customization. So by the end of the summer, we're very hopeful that everything will be, in essence, customizable. And the same applies, by the way, Mark, that to single, never married clients, if they don't have a spouse, you'll never see spouse or anything in there. So a customization may be able to put your own clauses in, even if we don't have them, able to move things around. It's going to help us build the BC templates and foreign jurisdiction templates, make it much more customizable. So just hang with us. We're starting that big project, which is going to be several months in the process, but by the end, you'll be able to really customize things to hopefully to a very, very high degree. So that's on the platter upcoming. Any closing remarks or any other questions? All right. Well, have a great rest of the week. We're not on next Tuesday because it's the beginning of the long weekend, or it's the end of the long weekend. We're not going to have a seminar then. But we'll be back the week after, and Michaela, you'll know the date. I don't know when that is. And then this Thursday, we have no webinar because, again, the long weekend. So hope everyone has a great week and a great long weekend, and we'll see you back on Thursday, May 30th for our next interactive Tuesday webinar, and May the 20-something for the Thursday. Okay, 25th. I knew Michaela was going to get that. Thanks so much. See you, everybody. Take good care.